A wealthy English landowner is found dead on a lonely path beside the dark and desolate moors. There are no obvious signs of violence, yet his face is frozen in terror. Near the body, investigators discover something even more disturbing: the enormous footprints of a hound. For generations, the Baskerville family has lived beneath the shadow of an ancient curse, a legend claiming that a monstrous supernatural dog hunts down the family's heirs. Now, Sir Henry Baskerville has arrived to inherit the estate, and someone, or something, appears determined to make sure he does not survive. This is The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Before long, one chilling question hangs over everything. Is a demon hound truly stalking the moors, or is a calculating human killer using an old legend to conceal the perfect crime? I'm Roger Braveheart, and a very warm welcome to the 33-Minute Stories channel. Here, the world's greatest classic novels are retold as clear, entertaining stories that are easy to follow and enjoyable to listen to. You can settle in and give the story your full attention, or leave it playing while you work, travel, relax, or get on with something else. As Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson investigate strange warnings, suspicious neighbours, and terrifying events upon the moor, you'll discover why The Hound of the Baskervilles remains one of the most famous and atmospheric detective stories ever written. By the end, you'll know the main events, characters, and ideas well enough to remember the story and speak confidently about it with others. My challenge is to transform this remarkable novel into an exciting and atmospheric story that captures its mystery, isolation, suspense, and growing sense of supernatural danger. Okay, so without further delay, let's get cracking. One morning at Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson examine a fine walking stick, left behind by a caller they missed the night before. Watson reasons that the owner must be a respected elderly country doctor. Holmes, with his lens and his cold logic, reshapes the picture into a young, amiable, unambitious, absent-minded man, once a house surgeon at a London hospital, and the owner of a curly-haired spaniel, just as the dog itself appears at the door. The visitor is Dr. Mortimer, a tall, thin, peering man of science from Dartmoor, who seems as eager to measure Holmes's skull as to state his business. But his business is urgent and must be settled within 24 hours. The doctor confesses himself an unpractical man, confronted with a most serious and extraordinary problem, and he has heard that Holmes stands alone as a practical man of affairs. Holmes, flattered only a little, asks him to state the case plainly. He begins with an old manuscript dated 1742 and reads aloud the legend of the Baskerville curse, how the wicked ancestor of the family, a wild and godless man, carried off a farmer's daughter, how she fled down the ivy and across the moonlit moor, and how, when he hunted her with his hounds after swearing his body and soul to the powers of evil, a gigantic black hound of hell was found standing over him, tearing out his throat. Since that night, the manuscript warns, many of the family have died sudden, bloody, and mysterious deaths, and its sons are counselled never to cross the moor in the dark hours. Holmes calls it a collector's fairy tale, so Dr. Mortimer produces a recent newspaper account of the death of Sir Charles Baskerville, master of Baskerville Hall, whose generosity had begun to restore the fallen family fortunes. Sir Charles was found dead at the far end of his own yew alley. The inquest blamed a diseased heart and found no mark of violence, though his face was so convulsed that his own doctor hardly knew him, and a drunken gypsy on the moor heard cries. Then comes what the public was never told. Sir Charles had taken the curse deeply to heart. Weeks before his death, he had stared in horror at something Mortimer took for a stray black calf. On the fatal night, his footprints changed beyond the gate to the moor, as though he walked on his toes, and near the body Dr. Mortimer himself saw fresh, clear marks. The footprints, he whispers, of a gigantic hound. Mortimer kept the mark secret at the inquest, unwilling to endorse a superstition or to make the hall untenantable. Holmes presses Dr. Mortimer for every detail of the scene. The high yew hedges, the padlocked gate to the moor, the gravel path where no mark could be read. Sir Charles, he concludes, did not stroll to his death. He ran for his life, away from his own house, already crazed with fear after standing at the gate for 5 or 10 minutes waiting for someone. Before the doctor leaves, he asks the real question: what should be done with the new heir, young Sir Henry Baskerville, who is landing in England within the hour? Holmes asks for 24 hours. Holmes is stung that he was not called to Devonshire at once, for rain and the boots of curious peasants have smudged a whole field of clues. But Mortimer had his reasons for silence, and 3 country people did see a strange, luminous creature on the moor before the death. The next morning Sir Henry arrives, a small, sturdy, weather-beaten man of about 30, fresh from farming in Canada. And he has a puzzle of his own. Someone has sent him a letter made of words cut from a newspaper, a warning to keep away from the moor if he values his life or his reason, with only the word moor written by hand. Holmes reads it like an open book. The words were snipped from the leading article of yesterday's Times with nail scissors, pasted in haste by an educated man pretending to be uneducated, and addressed with a spluttering hotel pen. Yet no one was supposed to know which hotel the heir had chosen. Then Sir Henry mentions, almost as an afterthought, that one of his brand-new brown boots was stolen from outside his door in the night. When the whole grim story is laid before him, Sir Henry refuses to be frightened off. There is no devil in hell and no man on earth, he declares, who can keep him from the home of his people. When their visitors leave, Holmes seizes his hat and follows them through the London streets, and spots a hansom cab sliding along behind, carrying a man with a bushy black beard and piercing eyes. The watcher sees them at the same instant, screams an order to his driver, and the cab flies away. Holmes admits his own management was poor. He should have walked the other way, hired a second cab, and shadowed the shadow. The beard, he suspects, was false, for a clever man on a delicate errand has no use for one except to hide his face. Holmes has one small consolation. He noted the cab's number, and he sets a sharp-eyed messenger boy to search the waste paper of 23 hotels for the mutilated newspaper page. At the Northumberland Hotel, Holmes checks the register and finds only respectable strangers, proof that whoever watches Sir Henry is anxious not to be seen. A coal owner and an invalid lady, both well known to the staff, are the only new names on the register, and neither could be the watcher. Upstairs they meet the baronet in a fury. Now a second boot has vanished, an old black one this time, and the hotel staff can explain nothing. Holmes takes the odd theft seriously. This case, he admits, cuts deeper than any he has handled. Over lunch the decision is made. Sir Henry will go down to Baskerville Hall at the end of the week. Since the London spy wore a full black beard, and the butler at the hall has just such a beard, Holmes sends a test telegram to learn whether the man is truly at his post. The talk turns to money, and the figures are startling. The dead man's will left £500 each to the butler and his wife, £1,000 to Dr. Mortimer, and a residue of £740,000 to Sir Henry. A fortune worth killing for. Should anything happen to the young man, the heir would be an elderly, saintly clergyman cousin who once refused money from Sir Charles. Holmes cannot leave London. A blackmail case threatens a great name. So he commends Watson to Sir Henry as the best man to have at his side in a tight place, with strict orders to report everything and keep his revolver near. Then, in the middle of the room they had all searched, the missing brown boot mysteriously reappears, as baffling as its theft. It is one more item in a rapid series of small mysteries: the printed warning, the bearded spy, the new boot lost, the old boot lost, and now the new boot returned, all apparently purposeless. By evening, 2 of Holmes's threads have snapped. The butler is certainly at the hall, and the boy has found no cut newspaper in any hotel. Then the cab driver himself storms in, demanding to know why he is being hunted, and tells them his fare claimed to be a detective and gave his name as Sherlock Holmes. The driver can describe the man only as about 40, middle height, dressed like a toff, with a pale face and a black beard cut square. Holmes laughs aloud at the audacity. He has been checkmated in London, and he calls the unknown man a foeman, worthy of their steel, sending Watson west with a heavy heart over an ugly, dangerous business. On the appointed morning, Holmes sees the party off at the station with his last instructions. Watson is to report facts only, and leave the theorizing to him. Sir Henry is never to go about alone, and everyone is to remember the old legend's warning, to avoid the moor in the dark hours when the powers of evil are exalted. He names the people Watson must study: the butler and his wife, the naturalist and his sister, a quarrelsome elderly gentleman at a nearby hall, and the few farmers scattered over the moor. The train carries them out of the city into a richer, redder countryside, and Sir Henry, who left Devon as a boy, drinks in every sight like a man coming home from exile. Then, beyond the green fields, the moor itself rises, grey, melancholy, and jagged like a landscape from a dream, and the young heir stares at it for a long time, this strange country where his blood has ruled for centuries. At the little station, armed warders are watching the roads. A convict has escaped from the great prison at Princetown, a murderer of peculiar ferocity, whose death sentence was commuted only because his crimes seemed scarcely sane. Somewhere out on that desolate plain he is hiding like a wild beast. The heir's arrival is a great event. Stationmaster and porters cluster round, and the coachman salutes Sir Henry as they climb into the waiting wagonette. The drive climbs through deep, dripping lanes and over granite bridges until the country grows bleaker with every mile, and at last, in a cup of twisted, storm-bent trees, 2 narrow towers rise before them. Baskerville Hall. The gates are surmounted by the boar's heads of the family. Beside the ruined old lodge stands a new building half-finished, the first fruit of the dead man's fortune. Sir Henry vows to string a row of electric lamps along the dark avenue within 6 months, as if to drive the shadows out of his inheritance. Inside, the hall is all black oak, dim stained glass, and shadow, and the butler and his wife, a pale, handsome, black-bearded man and his solemn partner, break the news that they mean to leave, for their old master's death has made the place painful to them. Dr. Mortimer has already driven home to his waiting wife, leaving the heir and his guardian to their first night under the ancestral roof. Dinner in the great gloomy dining chamber, beneath a dim line of painted ancestors, subdues even Sir Henry's spirits, and in the dead of night, lying wakeful in his room, Watson hears a sound that chills him, the muffled, strangling sob of a woman somewhere in the house. Morning sunlight turns the hall cheerful again, and Sir Henry decides their gloom was only tiredness, until Watson mentions the sobbing he heard. The baronet half heard it too, but the butler, gone a shade paler, swears it could not have been his wife, and he is lying, for Watson soon meets her in the corridor with red eyes behind swollen lids. Why should these 2 keep secrets? Watson walks the 4 miles to Grimpen, and learns from the postmaster that the test telegram was handed to the butler's wife, not the man himself. So there is still no proof the black-bearded servant was not the spy in London. Watson wonders whether the warning letter was the servant's work or the work of someone quietly countering him. On the lonely road home, a stranger comes running after him. A small, slim, flaxen man with a butterfly net and a tin specimen box. Stapleton, the naturalist of Merripit House. He knows exactly who Watson is, and that Holmes must be interesting himself in the case. He talks easily of Sir Charles's weak heart, and lets fall that the appearance of any dog might have killed him. Walking together across the moor, he shows Watson the great Grimpen Mire, a deadly green-spotted bog that swallows a pony before their eyes, and boasts that he alone can find the safe path through it. Then a long, low, mournful cry rolls over the emptiness, the sound the peasants call the Hound of the Baskervilles. Stapleton shrugs. Bogs make queer noises, or perhaps it is the last of the bitterns. He points out the grey rings of stone where prehistoric people once lived, then dashes off after a rare moth, bounding across the treacherous bog like some huge moth himself. At his bleak house, Watson meets the naturalist's sister, a dark, elegant beauty utterly out of place on the moor. Mistaking him for Sir Henry, she seizes the first moment alone to whisper, fierce and urgent, "Go straight back to London tonight, and never set foot upon the moor again." Her brother's return cuts her short. In his elegant sitting-room he tells how he once kept a school in the north until an epidemic killed 3 boys and broke him, and how his collection of moths and butterflies now fills his days. Later, she runs to intercept Watson and takes it all back. A woman's whim, she says, a fear for the family's fatal history. But he has seen the terror in her eyes, and he cannot forget it. She explains that her brother longs to see the hall inhabited for the good of the poor folk on the moor, and begs him to forget her words. Watson begins sending Holmes regular reports, and his first, written in mid-October, brings him up to date. The escaped convict is now widely believed to have fled the district. For a fortnight has passed without a sighting, a mercy for the lonely farms. The naturalist's lonely house, miles from any help, worries both men, but he will not hear of a groom sleeping there. Meanwhile, a new thread has appeared. Sir Henry is falling in love. Since meeting the naturalist's beautiful supposed sister, he can talk of little else, and she seems far from unwilling. Yet her brother watches the courtship with dark glances of disapproval, and takes pains that the two are never alone together. Stapleton guides the 2 men across the moor to the hollow where the old tragedy is said to have happened, a dismal valley where 2 great stones rear up like the corroding fangs of a monstrous beast, and there he hints that he half believes in evil influences, while saying less than he might. Dr. Mortimer, blissfully happy with a prehistoric skull dug from a barrow, guides them down the yew alley itself, the long, gloomy tunnel, the white gate where the cigar ash fell, the tumble-down summer-house at the far end. Another neighbour drifts into Watson's circle, an elderly red-faced gentleman of violent temper and bottomless appetite for lawsuits, who spends his days on his roof with a telescope, sweeping the moor in hopes of spotting the convict, and who threatens to prosecute Dr. Mortimer for digging up an ancient skull. As for the mystery of the telegram, it leads nowhere. The butler admits it reached him through his wife's hands, and Sir Henry, blunt as ever, questions him directly, and then pacifies him with a gift of his old London wardrobe. But the butler's wife keeps weeping in secret, and Watson's suspicions of the household harden one night, when about 2 in the morning a stealthy step passes his door. Peeping out, he sees a tall black shadow trailing down the corridor, the butler himself, barefoot, candle in hand, moving with an indescribably guilty air to one of the empty rooms. Through the doorway, Watson watches him crouch at the western window, candle held to the glass, his white face rigid with expectation as he stares out into the blackness of the moor. Some minutes pass. The man groans, douses the light, and creeps back. Long afterwards, Watson hears a key turned somewhere in a lock. Something secret is moving inside this house of gloom, and he and Sir Henry make a plan to catch it. Watson's second report overflows with events. The window where the butler keeps his vigil turns out to be the one window commanding a near view of the moor. He is watching for something out there. Before the trap is sprung, love causes a crisis. Sir Henry slips out alone to walk on the moor, and Watson, torn between his orders and his friend's privacy, follows at a distance. From a rocky hill he watches the baronet meet the beautiful neighbour and plead his heart, and then sees the naturalist burst upon them like a madman, net flying, raging, while the lady stands in haughty silence before being led away. Sir Henry is bewildered and wounded. His fortune, his title, and his character are all in his favour, so what can the brother have against him? That afternoon, Stapleton comes to apologise with astonishing grace. His sister is his whole life, he says, and the shock of losing her unmanned him. He asks only 3 months of friendship before any talk of love. Then comes the night watch. On the second night, the creak of a step rewards their patience, and they steal after the butler to the familiar room. Sir Henry walks straight in and demands the truth. The man, livid and trembling, refuses to tell a secret that is not his until his wife appears at the door and breaks. The light at the window is a signal, and the answering pinpoint out on the moor is her brother, the escaped convict, starving in his hiding place. They have been feeding him night by night, and could not let him perish at their gates. Their secret forced from them, Sir Henry and Watson seize their weapons and rush out onto the moor to take the man. The night answers them with horror. A long, deep howl rises and falls upon the wind, the very cry the country folk name after the Hound of the Baskervilles, and Sir Henry's hand turns cold as marble. They find the convict's candle guttering in a cleft of rock, glimpse his savage yellow face, and chase him over the hills until he vanishes. The fugitive hurls a rock as he breaks away. Watson carries his revolver to defend life, not to shoot a running man. And then, turning for home, Watson sees something stranger still. Black against the moon on the crest of a tor, the tall, thin figure of a man, arms folded, watching, gone in the blink of an eye. Sir Henry, who saw nothing, guesses it was a warder hunting the convict, but Watson is not so sure. A stranger is dogging them here just as one dogged them in London. From his diary, Watson records the days when the case quickens. The butler, smarting that his brother-in-law was hunted after the secret was confessed, wins Sir Henry's promise not to inform the police. The fugitive will soon be smuggled abroad, and in gratitude he gives up one last secret. On the night he died, Sir Charles stood at that gate to meet a woman. A single letter had come that morning from Coombe Tracy in a woman's hand, and though it was burned, one charred fragment survived, begging him, as he was a gentleman, to burn the letter and be at the gate by 10 o'clock, signed only with the initials L. Dr. Mortimer supplies the name, a young woman of the town, the estranged daughter of the litigious old neighbour, deserted by a worthless husband and helped by Sir Charles and others into a typewriting business. Dr. Mortimer, driving him home, is mourning his little spaniel, which has wandered onto the moor and never returned, and Watson privately fears the mire has it. Watson confronts her, and after denials that crumble one by one, she admits she wrote the letter and begged that very meeting. She was desperate for money to win her freedom, but she swears on all she holds sacred that she never went, because help reached her from another source. Beyond that she will not budge, and Watson leaves baffled, certain she is hiding something. Meanwhile, the butler lets fall a second startling fact. The convict spoke of another man hiding on the moor, a gentleman living among the old stone huts, supplied by a boy. Luck arrives in the shape of the elderly lawsuit lover, who, boasting over wine, reveals that his telescope has watched a child carrying a bundle across the moor at the same hour every day, to the stoniest hill, he insists, where no shepherd would go. Even as the old man boasts, the small, dark figure of the boy appears on the far hillside and vanishes over the crest. Watson watches through the telescope himself, then escapes the celebration and strikes out across the moor. Watson slips away over the moor, and beneath the hill he finds a circle of ancient huts, one still roofed. Inside, blankets in a waterproof, cold ashes, tinned food, a half-full bottle, and a penciled note reading, "Dr. Watson has gone to Coombe Tracy." It is he, not Sir Henry, whom this hidden watcher has been tracking. Watson sits in the dark with his revolver cocked, waiting for the tenant, until footsteps ring on the stones and a well-known voice, cool and ironical, remarks what a lovely evening it is. The secret watcher of the moor is Sherlock Holmes. Over a fire in the stone hut, Holmes explains his deception. He came down secretly, living rough so their opponent would not be warned, while Watson's reports reached him only a day late. His messenger boy has kept him supplied with bread and clean collars, and has even been set to watch Watson himself. And he has brought a revelation. The woman passing as Stapleton's sister is in truth his wife, and it was she who sent the cut-out warning to London. The whole monstrous plot now takes shape in Watson's mind. This, Holmes says quietly, is murder. Refined, cold-blooded, deliberate murder. One danger alone can threaten them, that the villain strikes before they are ready. At that instant, a scream of pure horror bursts out of the night, nearer and nearer, mingled with a deep, menacing roar. They run blindly through the dark. Too late. Below a cliff, spread-eagled on the stones, lies a body in the unmistakable ruddy tweed suit Sir Henry wore the day they met. The skull is crushed. Holmes curses himself for gambling with his client's life, until, bending close, he sees a beard. The dead man is not the baronet at all. It is the escaped convict, wearing the heir's cast-off clothes, run down in the dark by a hound that had been laid on Sir Henry's scent, doubtless by means of the stolen boot. One puzzle needles Holmes. How did the convict know in the darkness that the hound was on his trail? As they stand over the body, Stapleton himself strolls out of the night, cigar glowing, and absorbs with magnificent nerve the shock of seeing the wrong man dead. Holmes plays the beaten detective, calling the case unsatisfactory and announcing his return to London. Later that same night, back at the Hall over a belated supper, Holmes falls suddenly silent, his eyes fixed on the line of family portraits. When Sir Henry has gone to his room, Holmes leads Watson back by candlelight, mounts a chair and shades the painted hat and ringlets of the wicked ancestor, and Stapleton's own face stares out of the canvas. The naturalist is a Baskerville, a living throwback hunting the succession. By morning the trap is laid. Sir Henry must dine at Merripit House alone and walk home across the moor by the straight path, while Holmes and Watson pretend to depart for London, and the Scotland Yard detective comes down with a warrant. And the letter-writing woman, confronted with proof that her suitor is married, turns in fury on the man who used her. He dictated the fatal letter, kept her from the meeting, and frightened her into silence. She swears she never dreamed of harm to the kindest friend she ever had, and Holmes believes her. The baronet, though it galls him to be left alone, accepts his part. On the appointed night, Holmes, Watson, and the Scotland Yard man drive onto the dark moor and take up their ambush in the rocks above Merripit House. Through the uncurtained window, Watson watches Sir Henry at his host's table, pale and distrait, and sees Stapleton slip out to an outhouse where something alive stirs and scuffles. Then the one thing Holmes feared begins to happen. A dense white fog creeps off the great mire, swallowing the orchard, the house, and the path, and the watchers fall back before it, straining their ears. At last, quick footsteps sound. Sir Henry emerges from the silver wall of mist and passes close by, glancing over his shoulders, and behind him comes a thin, crisp patter. Out of the fog bursts the Hound, an enormous coal-black beast, fire streaming from its open mouth, its eyes and muzzle outlined in flame, a thing from a nightmare rather than from nature. For a moment the three men are paralysed. Then Holmes and Watson fire, the creature howls, and still it bounds on and hurls its victim to the ground, before Holmes empties 5 barrels into its flank. The great Hound is dead, and Sir Henry, mercifully unwounded, stares up at the monster that hunted him. Phosphorus, cunningly prepared, gave the family ghost its hellfire. In the house they find no villain, only a locked bedroom where the naturalist's wife lies tied to a beam, gagged and marked with the whip. She has turned against him at last, and she points them to his one refuge, the island deep in the mire where the Hound was kennelled. But the fog defeats all pursuit that night. Next morning she guides them to the hidden path, marked by wands through the quagmire. They find Sir Henry's stolen boot flung into the slime, and beyond it, nothing. Stapleton never reached his island. Somewhere in the foul depths of the Grimpen mire, the cold and cruel-hearted man lies buried forever. Sir Henry, shattered in nerve, slowly recovers under his doctor's care. Weeks later, by the Baker Street fire, Holmes lays out the whole design. The naturalist was the son of the disgraced Baskerville brother who had fled to South America. A thief, a failed schoolmaster under a false name, and a hidden heir who meant to murder his way to a fortune. His wife had been first his decoy, and then, when she refused to bait his trap with another man's ruin, his prisoner. And the stolen boot had been the means of laying the Hound on the right scent. The legend gave him his weapon. The old man's weak heart and superstition did the rest. The borrowed letter lured Sir Charles to the gate, and the blazing Hound did the killing no jury could ever trace, until it met the one man in England who refused to believe in ghosts. I believe this story is, at its heart, about fear, how it is created, how it is fed, and how it can be turned into a weapon. The book suggests that the most dangerous monster is not the one in the fog, but the one that grows inside a frightened mind. Sir Charles Baskerville is never touched by any creature. What kills him is terror itself, planted by a legend and nurtured by a man who understood exactly how to use it. I think the author may be drawing attention to the thin line between the supernatural stories people love and the cold, material facts that actually explain them. Again and again the tale tempts us to believe in the hellhound, and again the answer turns out to be phosphorus paint, a starved dog, and human cunning. I also think the story highlights the power of suggestion over every kind of mind, not just the simple ones. The peasants swear they have seen a fiery demon, but educated men are not immune. The doctor half believes, the naturalist pretends to believe, and even the brave young heir feels his blood freeze at a cry in the dark. The book seems to say that reason is a habit that must be defended, especially when the atmosphere, the mist, the moor, the midnight sobbing, is working against it. Greed is the other great engine of the plot, and I believe the author may be criticizing the things people will do for inheritance. The villain hides his name, his marriage, and his whole past, all for an estate, and the old family portrait suggests that his cruelty is a kind of inheritance too, a throwback to the wicked ancestor whose face he shares. The story seems fascinated by the idea that the past is never dead. It waits in bloodlines, in legends, and in that ancient moor where prehistoric huts still stand. I think the book also quietly honours loyalty and compassion in its minor figures. The butler and his wife risk everything to feed a hunted brother. A deceived wife and a deceived letter writer both find the courage, in the end, to stop protecting the man who used them. And I believe the author lets even his great detective be humbled. Holmes admits he risked his client's life for the sake of a perfect case. Finally, the story suggests that truth requires patience. Clues mean little until they are gathered, weighed, and tested. In a world quick to gossip and quick to fear, I think the book asks us to look steadily, doubt what merely glitters, and remember that most ghosts, when cornered, turn out to be only flesh, phosphorus, and greed. Thank you for staying till the end of The Hound of the Baskervilles. You obviously are a glutton for punishment. Please hit the like icon if you thought this video deserves it, so other people get to see it. Let me know in the comments which book you would like me to read to you next. Now YouTube have put on screen a channel subscribe icon, and below it my latest video for you to check out. See you next time.